Step into History Page, where Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot brings timeless mysteries to life.
In the opulent Villa Serenità, a scream pierces the Tuscan night. A man lies dead, a bloodied letter opener in his chest, and a single word, traditore, scrawled in desperation. Who betrayed whom? Was it the elegant Contessa, hiding grief behind her poise? The bitter brother, with secrets in his eyes? Or the enigmatic secretary, whose calm masks a deadly truth? Join Hercule Poirot, the master detective, as he unravels a web of lies where every clue, a sapphire brooch, a rose petal, a whispered dose, leads to a shocking revelation. Will you guess the killer before Poirot's little gray cells reveal all? Chapter 1. The Arrival at Villa Serenità. The late summer sun hung low over the Tuscan hills, casting a golden sheen across the sprawling grounds of Villa Serenità, the Italian estate of the late Conte Giovanni Rinaldi. The villa, a grand edifice of weathered stone and ivy-clad towers, stood as a monument to old-world opulence, its windows glinting like watchful eyes. Below, the gardens stretched in precise geometric patterns, their roses and cypresses swaying gently in the warm breeze. To an outsider, it was a scene of serene beauty, yet to those within its walls, a subtle tension simmered beneath the surface, like a kettle left too long on the flame. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion of Hercule Poirot, gazed out from the terrace, his hands clasped behind his back. The invitation to Villa Serenità had come unexpectedly, penned in the elegant hand of the Conte's widow, Contessa Isabella Rinaldi. She had written of a delicate matter requiring Poirot's unparalleled discretion, and though Hastings had pressed his friend for details, Poirot had only smiled, his mustache twitching with that infuriating air of knowing more than he would divulge. "It is a puzzle, my dear Hastings," Poirot had said, as their train rattled through the Italian countryside. "A puzzle wrapped in the velvet glove of politeness. We shall see what secrets this Villa Serenità hides." Now, as Hastings stood on the terrace, he surveyed the assembled guests, who had gathered for what was ostensibly a weekend of mourning and remembrance for the presence at the villa seemed to carry an undercurrent of resentment, though toward whom was unclear. Next, there was Miss Clara Beaumont, an Englishwoman of striking beauty and guarded demeanor. Her auburn hair was pinned neatly beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and her green eyes flickered with a wariness that Hastings found intriguing. She was introduced as the Conte's former secretary, retained by the Contessa for reasons not entirely clear. Then there was Dottore Emilio Vitti, a physician with a florid face and a penchant for loud laughter, who seemed overly eager to ingratiate himself with the others. Finally, Signora Teresa Moretti, a distant cousin of the Conte, hovered at the edges of the group, her sharp tongue and sharper glances cutting through the polite chatter like a knife through silk. The group had gathered for an early evening aperitivo, the clink of glasses and murmur of conversation filling the terrace. Yet Hastings sensed a brittleness in the air, as though each word were weighed and measured before being spoken. He glanced at his watch. 6:45 p.m. The sun would set soon, and with it, he suspected, the pretense of civility might begin to fray. "Signor Hastings," came a soft voice at his elbow. It was the Contessa, her smile as polished as the crystal glass in her hand. "You are enjoying our little gathering, I hope?" Hastings, ever the gentleman, inclined his head. "Immensely, Contessa. The villa is magnificent, and your hospitality is beyond reproach." She laughed, a low, musical sound that did not quite reach her eyes. "You are kind, but I confess I am eager for Signor Poirot to join us. His reputation precedes him, and I believe his presence will clarify certain matters." Before Hastings could inquire further, a shadow fell across the terrace. Hercule Poirot, resplendent in a perfectly tailored suit of dove gray, stepped into the fading light. His small stature belied the commanding presence he exuded, his green eyes darting over the assembled company with the precision of a jeweler examining a gem. His mustache, waxed to perfection, gleamed as he bowed slightly to the Contessa. "Madame," Poirot said, his voice smooth and accented with the faintest trace of his Belgian
Him. As the aperitivo continued, Hastings noted the time, 7 p.m. The conversation turned to the late Conte, his legacy, and the villa itself, which was said to house a collection of priceless artifacts. Lorenzo Rinaldi spoke of his brother's passion for rare manuscripts, while Clara Beaumont mentioned a particular sapphire brooch the Conte had cherished. Dottore Vitti, with a forced chuckle, recounted a story of the Conte's generosity, though his eyes darted nervously toward the Contessa. Signora Moretti, meanwhile, remained silent, her lips pursed, as though tasting something bitter. By 7:15 p.m., the terrace had grown cooler, and the guests began to drift indoors toward the grand dining room. Hastings followed, his mind buzzing with questions. What was the delicate matter the Contessa had hinted at? Why had Poirot been summoned so urgently? And why did the air feel so heavy with secrets? As they crossed the threshold into the villa, a piercing scream shattered the evening's calm. It came from the upper floor, sharp and unmistakable. The guests froze, glasses clattering to the stone floor. Hastings' heart leapt, his military instincts kicking in as he turned to Poirot. Poirot's expression was unreadable, but his eyes gleamed with a quiet intensity. "And so," he murmured, almost to himself, "the curtain rises." Chapter 2. The Crimson Stain. The scream still echoed in the air as the guests of Villa Serenità stood frozen, their faces a tableau of shock and suspicion. Captain Hastings, his pulse quickening, glanced at Hercule Poirot, whose calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos. The little Belgian detective adjusted his tie with a precise flick of his fingers, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the scene. "Mon Dieu, a disturbance so early in the evening," Poirot murmured, his voice barely audible over the rustle of movement as the guests stirred. "Hastings, mon ami, let us ascend. The truth, it does not wait." The scream had come from the upper floor, and without hesitation, Poirot led the way up the grand marble staircase, across the front of his white shirt, crimson and glistening, pooling beneath him on the Persian rug. A letter opener, its handle ornate with silver filigree, protruded from his chest. A gasp rose from the group. Contessa Isabella clutched her necklace, her composure fracturing. "Dio mio," she whispered. "Emilio." Signora Teresa Moretti, who had been the source of the sob, stood trembling near the window, her hands pressed to her mouth. I came to fetch him for dinner," she stammered. "I found him like this." Poirot stepped forward, his movements precise, as though navigating a chessboard. He knelt beside the body, his gloved hands hovering, but not touching. "The wound is fresh," he observed, his voice clinical. "The blood, it has not yet congealed. This crime, it is recent, perhaps within the last 10 minutes. Hastings, standing near the doorway, scanned the room. The window was closed, its latch secure, ruling out an intruder from outside. A half-empty glass of wine sat on the desk, its contents undisturbed. A single sheet of paper lay beside it, its edge slightly crumpled, as though it had been hastily set down. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked steadily. 7:22 p.m. "Who was the last to see Dottore Vitti alive?" Poirot asked, rising to his feet and turning to face the group. His green eyes, sharp as cut glass, moved from one face to another. Lorenzo Rinaldi cleared his throat, his fingers still twisting his gold ring.
I saw him at the aperitivo, just before we came inside. He was laughing, as always, full of life. Indeed, Poirot said, his tone neutral, but his gaze piercing. And you, Signora Moretti, you entered this room when? Teresa's eyes darted nervously. Just moments ago, at 7:15. I was sent to call him to dinner. The door was ajar, and when I entered, her voice broke, and she gestured toward the body. Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching slightly. And the scream, it came at precisely 7:16. Did it not, Hastings? Hastings, startled, take charge. The local polizia will be called, but they are unrefined. We need your expertise. Poirot inclined his head. Hercule Poirot does not refuse a challenge, madame. But I must warn you. The truth, it is like a mirror. It reflects all, even that which we wish to hide.
As the Contessa nodded, Hastings noticed Lorenzo exchange a fleeting glance with Clara, so brief it might have been imagined. Signora Moretti, meanwhile, seemed to shrink further into herself, her eyes fixed on the blood-stained rug. Poirot began to pace the room, his steps measured, his hands clasped behind his back. He paused by the desk, his gaze settling on the crumpled paper. Without touching it, he leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "Interesting," he murmured. "A note, perhaps? Or a clue left by the victim in his final moments?" Hastings joined him, peering over his shoulder. The paper bore a single word, scrawled in a hurried hand. Traditore. Betrayer. "What does it mean, Poirot?" Hastings asked, his voice low. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "It means, mon ami, that Dottore Vitti knew his killer, or thought he did. And that knowledge, it has cost him his life." The sound of footsteps announced the arrival of the villa's steward, who informed them that the local police had been summoned and would arrive within the hour. Poirot nodded, dismissing the man with a wave. "We have little time, Hastings," he said softly. "Before the police trample the scene, we must observe. Every detail, every gesture, it matters." As the guests were ushered out, their faces pale and their voices hushed, Poirot lingered, his gaze sweeping the room once more. Hastings watched him, marveling at the calm intensity of his friend. The little grey cells, as Poirot called them, were already at work, sifting through the chaos to find the thread of truth. Outside, the Tuscan night had fallen, the stars obscured by a veil of clouds. Inside Villa Serenita, the air was thick with secrets, and the crimson stain on the rug marked the beginning of a puzzle that only Hercule Poirot could solve. Chapter 3. The little grey cells stir. The study at Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign Hastings recognized as suppressed amusement. "A game, Capitano?" "No, it is a puzzle, and I, Hercule Poirot, am its master." With the police occupied, Poirot drew Hastings aside, his green eyes gleaming under the chandelier's soft light. The hour was now 8:30 p.m., and the guests had been gathered in the villa's grand salon, a room of gilded mirrors and velvet drapes. The air was thick with tension, the earlier scream still lingering in memory like a discordant note. "Hastings, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low. "Observe the players. Their faces, their hands, their silences, they speak louder than words. We must learn who was where and when in the moments before Dottore Vitti met his end." Hastings nodded, his military training sharpening his focus. The scream was at 7:16 p.m., and Signora Moretti said she found him at 7:15. That leaves a tight window for the murder. "Précisément," Poirot replied, tapping his temple. "The little grey cells, they are already at work. But first we must establish the alibis. Come." They entered the salon, where the guests sat in uneasy clusters. Contessa Isabella stood by the fireplace, her posture regal, but her fingers betraying a slight tremble as they traced the edge of a porcelain figurine.
Lorenzo Rinaldi paced near the window, his lean frame taut with nervous energy. Clara Beaumont sat composed, her hands folded in her lap, though her green eyes flicked toward the door as if expecting an escape. Signora Teresa Moretti, still shaken, clutched a handkerchief, her sharp features softened by fear. Poirot clapped his hands, the sound sharp in the hushed room. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice carrying an authority that silenced even Lorenzo's restless steps. "A tragedy has occurred, and Hercule Poirot will uncover the truth. But I require your cooperation. Each of you will tell me where you were between 7 p.m., when we were all on the terrace, and 7:15 p.m., when Signora Moretti discovered the body. Begin." Contessa Isabella spoke first, her voice steady but clipped. "I was
On the upper floor, near the study, no?" Clara's lips tightened briefly. "Yes, but I heard nothing until Signora Moretti's scream." Signora Moretti, her voice trembling, spoke last. "I was in the drawing room, reading, after we left the terrace at 7 o'clock. At 7:15, the Contessa asked me to fetch Dottore Vitti for dinner. I went to the study and found him." Poirot's gaze lingered on her, his expression unreadable. "And the door, signora? It was ajar when you arrived?" "Yes," she whispered. "I pushed it open and saw the blood." Hastings scribbled notes in his pocketbook, noting the times. Contessa in the dining room from 7:05, Lorenzo in the library from 7:00, Clara in her room from 7:10, Teresa in the drawing room until 7:15. The alibis were neat, too neat, he thought, glancing at Poirot. "Bon," Poirot said, clasping his hands. "Now, a question. Did any of you see Dottore Vitti after we left the terrace at 7? Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Finally, Lorenzo spoke, his voice low. "I saw him briefly at 7:05, crossing the hall toward the study. He seemed agitated." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Agitated, you say? And you did not think to mention this earlier, Signor Rinaldi?" Lorenzo shrugged, his expression guarded. "It didn't seem important." "Everything is important," Poirot said softly, "when a man lies dead." As the guests exchanged uneasy glances, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Come, mon ami. Let us return to the study. The police, they will have their methods, but Poirot, he sees what others overlook." Back in the study, now lit by harsh police lanterns, Poirot moved with the precision of a watchmaker. He examined the letter opener, still embedded in Vitti's chest, noting its silver handle engraved with the Rinaldi crest. "A family heirloom," he murmured. "Curious, no? That it should be the instrument of death." He turned to the desk, where the crumpled paper with the word traditore lay untouched. This
Belgian Detective. Chapter 4. The Interrogations. The grand salon of Villa Serenità, with its gilded mirrors and heavy velvet drapes, felt oppressively silent as Hercule Poirot began his interrogations. The hour was 9:30 p.m., and the guests, still reeling from the discovery of Dottore Emilio Vitti's body, sat in a semicircle of unease. Captain Hastings, stationed near the door, noted the time and the strained expressions of the assembled company. The police, under Capitano Rossi's direction, were still combing the study, but Poirot had insisted on conducting his own inquiries, his method as meticulous as a surgeon's. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his small frame commanding the room with an authority that belied his stature. His green eyes, sharp and unyielding, moved from face to face, and his moustache quivered slightly as he clasped his hands behind his back. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice a measured cadence,
A man is dead, and the truth, it hides among you. Hercule Poirot will uncover it, but I require your candor. Let us begin with the facts, and then, perhaps, the shadows will lift. He turned first to Contessa Isabella, who sat with regal poise, her dark eyes meeting his without flinching. Madame, you were in the dining room from 7:05 until the scream at 7:16. The steward, Marco, confirms this. But tell me, what was your relationship with Dottore Vitti? The Contessa's fingers tightened around her glass of water, though her voice remained steady. Emilio was our family physician for years, ever since my husband, the Conte, took ill. He was dependable, if overly familiar at times. I trusted him with Giovanni's care. Poirot tilted his head. And after the Conte's death 6 months ago, you retained his services. Why? Her lips pressed into a thin line. He knew the family's history. It was practical. Practical, Poirot echoed, his tone neutral but his gaze piercing. And did you notice anything unusual in his behavior this evening? She hesitated.
To Clara Beaumont, whose auburn hair glowed softly in the lamplight. She sat with her hands folded, her posture composed, but her green eyes wary. Mademoiselle Beaumont, Poirot said, you were in your room from 7:10 until the scream. The study is nearby, yet you heard nothing. No voices, no struggle? Clara's gaze was steady. Nothing, Monsieur Poirot. My room is at the end of the corridor, and the walls are thick. I was adjusting my attire when I heard Signora Moretti's scream. Poirot's mustache twitched. And your role as the Conte's secretary, did it bring you close to Dottore Vitti? Her lips parted slightly, then closed. We worked together occasionally when the Conte's health required coordination. Emilio was professional, if a bit overbearing. Overbearing, Poirot repeated softly. An interesting choice of word. Finally he turned to Signora Teresa Moretti, who clutched her handkerchief as though it were a lifeline. Her sharp features were drawn, her eyes red-rimmed. Signora, you found the body at 7:15. You entered the study, the door ajar, and saw Dottore Vitti. Did you touch anything? Teresa shook her head vehemently. No, no! I saw the blood, the letter opener. I screamed and ran to the door. I touched nothing. Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. And your relationship with the doctor? He was a distant acquaintance, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We spoke little. He was always too cheerful for my taste. Poirot paced slowly, his polished shoes silent on the thick carpet. Bon, we have a picture, incomplete but forming. Dottore Vitti, he was a man known to you all, yet none claim intimacy. A man agitated, perhaps betrayed, as the word traditore suggests. And a letter opener, a family heirloom used to end his life. Hastings glanced at his watch. 9:45 p.m. The room felt stifling, the weight of suspicion pressing on every occupant. Poirot stopped pacing and faced the group. One detail troubles me, but I haven't used it in weeks. It was in my room. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Then how, Signor Rinaldi, did it come to rest where a man was killed? The room fell silent, the accusation hanging like a storm cloud. Hastings felt a chill, knowing Poirot was only beginning to unravel the tangled threads of Villa Serenita's secrets. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The revelation of Lorenzo Rinaldi's cigarette case, found behind the desk where Dottore Emilio Vitti lay murdered, sent a ripple of tension through the grand salon of Villa Serenita. It was 10 p.m., and the air, already heavy with suspicion, grew thicker as the guests exchanged furtive glances. Captain Hastings, his notebook open, scribbled furiously, noting the sudden pallor in Lorenzo's face and the way his fingers clenched into fists. Hercule Poirot, however, stood serene, his green eyes glinting with the calm certainty of a man who saw beyond the obvious. "Signor Rinaldi," Poirot said, his voice soft but cutting, "you claim this cigarette case was in your room, yet it appears at the scene of a murder. Explain this, if you please." Lorenzo's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to the others before settling on Poirot. "I told you I haven't used it in weeks. Someone must have taken it, placed it there to implicate me." "A convenient theory," Poirot replied, his mustache twitching. "But convenience, it is not truth. We shall see." Capitano Rossi, standing by the door, folded his arms, his skepticism palpable. "This case is damning, Signor Rinaldi. You were seen near the study at 7:05, and now your property is found at the crime scene. What were you doing in that hall?" Lorenzo's voice rose, a note of desperation creeping in. "I told you I was going to the library. I saw Vitti, yes, but I didn't follow him. I had no reason to harm him." Contessa Isabella interjected, her tone sharp. "Lorenzo, calm yourself. This outburst does no good." Her dark eyes flicked to Poirot, as if gauging his reaction.
Traditore still lay, and then turned his attention to the cigarette case, now bagged by the police but visible through the clear plastic. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot said, pointing to the case. "It is monogrammed, yes, but it is also polished. Too polished, perhaps, for an item supposedly forgotten in a drawer. And its placement, behind the desk, it is almost too perfect, no?" Hastings frowned. "You think it was planted?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "I think, mon ami, that someone wishes us to think. But Hercule Poirot, he is not so easily led." He moved to the wine-glass on the desk, sniffing it again. "The sediment I noted earlier, it is not mere residue. I suspect a substance, perhaps a sedative, was added. The autopsy will confirm this, but it suggests our killer planned carefully." Hastings' eyes widened. "Poison and a stab wound? That's excessive, surely." "Précisément," Poirot said. "Excess reveals intent. The letter opener, it is dramatic, personal. The poison, it is silent, methodical. We have a killer who wishes both to conceal and to proclaim." As Poirot continued his examination, Hastings noticed a small detail. A faint smudge on the desk's edge, barely visible in the lamplight. "Poirot, look here," he said, pointing. "It looks like ink, perhaps." Poirot leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "Ink, oui, but fresh. And see, it is blue, while the pen on the desk uses black ink. Another curiosity." He straightened, his expression thoughtful. "This smudge, the petal, the cigarette case, they are threads in a tapestry, Hastings. We must weave them carefully." Back in the salon, the atmosphere had grown taut. Lorenzo, now seated, glared at the floor, while Clara Beaumont's calm facade showed signs of strain, her fingers twisting a loose thread on her sleeve. Signora Teresa Moretti whispered to herself, her handkerchief damp with tears. Contessa Isabella stood apart, her gaze fingers steepled. "Hastings," he said, "the cigarette case.
It is too obvious. A killer who leaves such a clue wishes to distract us. But from what? And why? Hastings shook his head. Lorenzo's the obvious suspect, but you're right, it's too neat. And that word, traditore, it suggests a personal betrayal. Could it be tied to the Conte's death? Poirot's eyes gleamed. You begin to think like Poirot, mon ami. The Conte's death 6 months ago, it casts a long shadow. Dottore Viti was his physician. Perhaps he knew something, or did something. As Hastings pondered this, Poirot rose, his expression resolute. Tomorrow, we dig deeper. The alibis, they are fragile, and the clues, they whisper of a truth we have yet to grasp. Sleep well, Hastings, for the little gray cells, they do not rest. The night closed over Villa Serenita, its secrets buried but stirring, like embers beneath ash, waiting for Poirot's keen mind to fan them into flame. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Villa Serenita, casting long shadows across the marble floors. It was 8 a.m., and the villa, though outwardly serene, thrummed with the unspoken tension of the previous night's tragedy. Captain Hastings, bleary-eyed from a restless sleep, joined Hercule Poirot in the dining room, where the little Belgian detective sat sipping a cup of espresso, his demeanor as pristine as his perfectly knotted tie. "Hastings, mon ami," Poirot said, his green eyes bright despite the early hour. "You look as though the night has been unkind. But for Poirot, the night is a time for the little gray cells to work, to ponder, to align the pieces of our puzzle." Hastings managed a wry smile, helping himself to a croissant. "I don't know how you do it, Poirot. A man's been murdered, and you're as calm as if you're solving a crossword." Poirot's mustache twitched. "A crossword? No. A murder. It is a symphony."
Hastings noted the time. 8:30 a.m. Poirot moved to the desk, his eyes fixed on the faint blue ink smudge Hastings had noticed the previous night. He produced a small magnifying glass from his pocket, examining the mark with the precision of a jeweler. "This ink," he murmured. "It is not from the pen on the desk. See, the pen's ink is black, yet this smudge is blue and fresh. It was made recently, perhaps during the crime." Hastings frowned. But who uses blue ink? And why would it matter? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Everything matters, Hastings. A smudge, it is a whisper of carelessness. Let us see where it leads." He turned his attention to the crumpled paper, lifting it carefully with gloved fingers. The word traditore was written in black ink, the handwriting hurried but legible. Poirot's eyes narrowed. This note, it was written by the victim, I believe. The pressure of the pen, the slant, it suggests urgency, fear. But why only one word? And why this word? Hastings leaned closer. "You think Viti wrote it as he was dying, to name his killer?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, "or perhaps to warn. But there is more." He gestured to the edge of the paper, where a tiny tear, barely noticeable, marked the corner. This tear, it is deliberate, as if the paper was torn from a larger sheet. We must find its source. Poirot's gaze swept the room, settling on a small wastebasket near the desk. He knelt, sifting through its contents with care. Among the crumpled receipts and a discarded envelope, he found a torn scrap of paper, its edge matching the tear on the traditore note. The scrap bore a single line, written in the same black ink. "The sapphire will reveal all." Hastings's eyes widened. The sapphire! Could it be the Conte's brooch Clara mentioned during the aperitivo? Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. Précisément. The brooch, it is a thread in our tapestry. We must learn more of it. Leaving the study, Poirot requested a private audience with Clara Beaumont, who was found in the garden, sketching beneath a sun. Shook her head, her voice steady. Nothing, Monsieur Poirot. As I said, the walls are thick. Yet a rose petal was found in the study, Poirot said softly, and you were in the garden yesterday, sketching roses. Her fingers stilled on her sketchbook. I told you I brought no flowers inside. Surely you don't think— I think only what the facts permit, Poirot interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. That but the facts, they whisper of contradictions. As they left Clara, Hastings glanced at his watch. 9:15 a.m. She's hiding something, Poirot, he said. That glance she gave Teresa last night, it wasn't nothing. Poirot nodded. You observe well, Hastings. Mademoiselle Beaumont, she is composed, but beneath there is a current of fear. And this sapphire brooch, it is more than a jewel. It is a key. Back in the villa, Poirot requested to see the brooch. Contessa Isabella led them to a small safe in the library, her hands steady as she unlocked it. The sapphire brooch, nestled in velvet, was breathtaking, a deep blue gem the size of a quail's egg, surrounded by delicate gold filigree. But Poirot's attention was drawn to a tiny scratch on the gold, barely visible. This scratch, he said, it is recent. And see, there is a trace of blue ink caught in it. The Contessa's eyes widened. Ink? But how? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. That, madame, is the question. The brooch, the ink, the petal, they are pieces of a puzzle. And Hercule Poirot, he will fit them together. As they left the library, the clock struck 9:30 a.m., and Hastings felt the weight of the mystery deepen, the villa's secrets coiling tighter around them. More lies surface. The morning light in Villa Serenita had grown harsher by 10 a.m., as though the sun itself were probing the villa's secrets. Hercule Poirot, ever meticulous, sat in the library with Captain Hastings, the sapphire brooch now safely returned. Please, the truth, it is always preferable to silence. Teresa's eyes darted to the Contessa, then to the floor. I wasn't entirely honest last night, she said, her voice trembling. When I said I saw nothing in the study before finding Emilio, that wasn't true. I saw Clara Beaumont in the corridor near the study at 7:10 p.m. Hastings' pen paused, his eyes narrowing. Clara, but she said she was in her room. Teresa nodded, her hands twisting the handkerchief into knots. She was coming from the direction of the study, moving quickly. She looked startled. I didn't think much of it then, but after finding Emilio, I wondered. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. And you did not mention this before, Signora. Why? Teresa's cheeks flushed. I didn't want to accuse her. Clara's always been kind to me, and I thought perhaps I was mistaken. But I couldn't keep silent any longer. The Contessa's expression remained unreadable, but her fingers tightened briefly on the arm of her chair. Teresa came to me this morning, she said. I urged her to tell you, Signor Poirot. We cannot have secrets in such a matter. Poirot's smile was faint but knowing. Secrets, madame, are the currency of this villa. But let us verify this. Hastings, fetch Mademoiselle Beaumont. Hastings found Clara in the drawing room, her sketchbook open to a half-finished drawing of the villa's gardens. Her green eyes widened slightly at his request, but she followed without protest. In the library, Poirot wasted no time. Mademoiselle Beaumont, he began, his tone deceptively mild. Signora Moretti claims she saw you in the corridor near the study at 7:10 p.m., looking startled, yet you told us you were in your room. Explain this discrepancy, if you please." Clara's composure faltered, her hands clasping tightly in her lap. I misspoke," she admitted, her voice low. "I was in the corridor briefly. I went to the study to retrieve a book the Conti had lent me, a rare manuscript, but the door was locked, so I returned to my room." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Locked, you say? Yet, Signora
You may go, but know this. The truth, it has a way of surfacing, like oil on water." As Clara left, Hastings noted the time, 10:30 a.m. He turned to Poirot. "She's lying, isn't she? Or at least holding something back?" Poirot nodded. "She conceals, yes. But so do others. The locked door, the manuscript, these are new threads. We must follow them." Their next stop was Lorenzo Rinaldi, found in the billiard room, a glass of brandy in hand despite the early hour. His lean frame was tense, his eyes shadowed. "Signor Rinaldi," Poirot said, "your cigarette case, it troubles me. And now, a new question. What was your relationship with Dottore Vitti, truly?" Lorenzo's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Emilio was a leech. He clung to this family, to my brother's wealth, his influence. After Giovanni's death, he stayed on, sniffing for scraps. I despised him." "Enough to kill him?" Poirot asked, his tone neutral. Lorenzo's eyes flashed. "No, I'm no murderer. But I won't pretend I'm sorry he's gone." Poirot's gaze lingered on Lorenzo's gold ring, still twisting on his finger. "And the Conte's death? Did you blame Dottore Vitti for it?" Lorenzo's hand stilled. "Giovanni was ill for years. Emilio did what he could, or so he claimed. But I always wondered, was it incompetence, or something more?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "A question worth asking, Signor. Merci." As they left the billiard room, Hastings felt a chill. "Poirot, are we looking at two crimes? Vitti's murder, and something tied to the Conte's death." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The past, Hastings, it casts a long shadow. The sapphire brooch, the manuscript, the word traditore. They suggest a motive rooted in history. We must dig deeper." By 11 a.m., the villa seemed to pulse with hidden truths, each revelation peeling back a layer of deception. Poirot, undeterred, moved with the precision of a clockmaker, his little grey cells weaving the threads of lies into a pattern only he could yet see. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The air cadence that commanded attention. We have uncovered lies, half-truths, and shadows. But the heart of this crime, it lies in emotion, passion, betrayal, fear. Someone among you knows more than they have said. I invite you now to speak, before the truth forces its way out. Contessa Isabella, seated with regal poise, fixed Poirot with a steady gaze. "Signor Poirot, we are all shaken by Emilio's death. But surely you don't believe one of us is capable of such a thing." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Madame, the human heart, it is capable of much, both great and terrible. Let us explore this heart, shall we?" Before he could continue, Signora Teresa Moretti, who had been clutching her damp handkerchief, rose abruptly, her sharp features contorted with distress. "I can't bear it any longer," she cried, her voice cracking like brittle glass. "I've been silent too long, and it's eating me alive." The room froze, every eye turning to her. Hastings, his notebook open, scribbled the time, 12:05 p.m. Poirot stepped closer, his expression one of gentle encouragement. "Speak, Signora. What burdens you?" Teresa's hands trembled as she spoke, her words tumbling out in a rush. "It's about the Conte's death, 6 months ago. Emilio, Dottore Vitti, He was there, tending to Giovanni. I overheard him speaking with someone late one night in the library. He said, the dose must be precise or it will be too obvious. I thought he was talking about medicine, but after Giovanni died, I wondered, was it something else? A gasp rippled through the room. Contessa Isabella's face paled, her hand gripping the arm of her chair. Lorenzo Rinaldi's eyes narrowed, his fingers pausing in their habitual twisting of his gold ring. Clara Beaumont remained still, but her green eyes flickered with something unreadable. Poirot's voice was soft, but incisive. Signora Moretti, this is a grave accusation. With whom was Dottore Vitti speaking? Teresa shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't know.
Unravels. If I had, I'd have confronted him myself.
Contessa Isabella rose, her voice cutting through the tension. Enough. This is speculation, nothing more. Teresa, you should have spoken sooner. Signor Poirot, what does this mean? Poirot's eyes gleamed. It means, madame, that the past and present are entwined. The Conte's death, it is a shadow over this crime. Dottore Vitti's murder, it is not merely a moment of passion, but a reckoning for secrets long buried. Hastings, his pulse quickening, noted Clara's silence. Her hands were clasped tightly, her knuckles white. Poirot, he whispered, leaning close. Clara's not saying a word. She's hiding something. Poirot nodded, almost imperceptibly. Oui, Hastings. But it is Signora Moretti's outburst that has shifted the board. Let us press further. He turned to the group, his voice rising slightly. The sapphire brooch, the manuscript, the blue ink, the rose petal, these are not mere objects but signposts. And now, a conversation overheard, a hint of poison. I ask you all, what did Dottore Vitti know about the Conte's death that made him a target? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Clara's lips parted as if to speak, but she closed them again, her gaze dropping to her lap. Lorenzo's eyes burned with anger, while the Contessa's composure seemed to fray at the edges, her fingers trembling slightly. Poirot clapped his hands, the sound sharp in the tense silence. Bon, we shall pause here, but know this. The truth, it is like a tide. It cannot be held back forever. I will speak with each of you again, and the pieces they will fall into place. As the guests dispersed, their faces a mix of fear and suspicion, Hastings followed Poirot to the terrace, where the detective lit a cigarette, a rare indulgence, and exhaled a thin stream of smoke. The time was 12:30 p.m., and the Tuscan sun beat down relentlessly. Poirot, Hastings said, Teresa's confession, it's a bombshell. Do you think Vitti was involved in the Conte's death? Poirot's eyes narrowed, fixed on the distant hills. Chapter 9. The Trap. The afternoon sun bathed Villa Serenità in a golden glow, but within its walls, the atmosphere was charged with suspicion and dread. It was 2 p.m., and Hercule Poirot had requested that the guests gather once more in the grand salon, a request that carried the weight of inevitability. Captain Hastings, his notebook worn from constant use, sensed that Poirot was preparing to tighten the noose around the killer's neck. The little Belgian detective stood before the fireplace, his posture impeccable, his green eyes gleaming with a quiet intensity that silenced the room. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice a measured blend of authority and calm. We stand at a crossroads in this affair. A man is dead, and the clues, oh, they multiply like shadows in a storm. The sapphire brooch, the blue ink, the rose petal, the cigarette case, the word traditore, and now a whispered conversation about a precise dose. Hercule Poirot sees the pattern, but to complete it, I must apply pressure. Today we shall lay a trap. A murmur rippled through the group. Contessa Isabella's dark eyes narrowed, her fingers tightening around the arm of her chair. Lorenzo Rinaldi, leaning against the wall, stiffened, his gold ring glinting as he twisted it. Clara Beaumont sat with her hands folded, her composure a brittle mask, while Signora Teresa Moretti clutched her handkerchief, her sharp features drawn with anxiety. Hastings noted the time. 2:05 p.m. He leaned closer to Poirot, whispering, "A trap, Poirot? What are you planning?" Poirot's mustache twitched, but he offered no reply, instead addressing the group. "The killer? They are clever, but not clever enough. They have left clues, some deliberate, some careless. I propose a simple experiment. Tonight, at precisely 8 p.m., we shall reconvene in the study where Dottore Vitti met his end. I have asked Capitano Rossi to allow this, and he has agreed, provided we disturb nothing. There, I shall reveal a new piece of evidence, one that will force the truth into the open." Lorenzo's voice cut through the silence, sharp with unease. "What evidence? You can't..."
Poirot does not toy. He observes. He deduces. He reveals. Tonight at 8 p.m., you will see. As the guests dispersed, their faces a mix of apprehension and defiance, Hastings followed Poirot to the terrace, where the detective lit another rare cigarette, exhaling a thin plume into the warm air. "Poirot," Hastings said, "you're bluffing, aren't you? What new evidence?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "A trap, mon ami, does not always require bait. The suggestion of evidence, it is enough to unsettle the guilty. Their actions, their glances, their mistakes, they will betray them." Hastings frowned. "But what if they don't take the bait? What if no one reacts? Then we learn something else," Poirot said, "for silence too is a response. But I suspect our killer will not remain silent. The pressure, it mounts, and the guilty, they crack like porcelain under strain." Throughout the afternoon, Poirot and Hastings observed the guests discreetly. At 3 p.m., Hastings saw Clara slip into the library, her movements furtive as she glanced over her shoulder. Moments later, Lorenzo was spotted pacing the garden, his face dark with thought. Teresa lingered in the drawing room, her eyes fixed on a photograph of the late Conte, while the Contessa moved through the villa with a forced calm, issuing orders to the staff. At 5 p.m., Poirot requested a private meeting with Capitano Rossi, who grudgingly shared the preliminary autopsy results. The letter opener was the cause of death, Rossi said, but there was a sedative in Vitti's system. Enough to slow his reactions, not enough to kill. The wineglass. It's being tested for traces. Poirot nodded. As I suspected. The killer. They wished to ensure their victim was vulnerable. Merci, Capitano. By 7 p.m., as the villa prepared for dinner, Hastings noticed a subtle shift. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her necklace, and Lorenzo's usual restlessness had given way to a brooding stillness. Teresa avoided eye contact, her handkerchief now a crumpled ruin. The Contessa, however, remained a pillar of composure, though her eyes betrayed. The silence was deafening, each second stretching into eternity. Hastings held his breath, his eyes darting from one face to another, waiting for the trap to spring. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The study of Villa Serenità was a crucible of tension as the clock struck 8 p.m., its chimes reverberating through the silent room. The guests stood or sat in a taut semicircle, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of the single lamp on the desk. Hercule Poirot, his small frame radiating authority, stood at the center, his green eyes glinting like polished jade. Captain Hastings, positioned near the door, clutched his notebook, his heart pounding as he sensed the climax of Poirot's carefully laid trap. The air was thick with anticipation, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on every occupant. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began,
his voice a steady cadence that cut through the tension. "Tonight, Hercule Poirot shall reveal the truth behind the murder of Dottore Emilio Vitti. The clues, the sapphire brooch, the blue ink, the rose petal, the cigarette case, the word traditore, and the whispered conversation about a precise dose. They have woven a tapestry of betrayal. And now, the final thread." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering on each face. Contessa Isabella's regal composure, Lorenzo Rinaldi's clenched jaw, Clara Beaumont's guarded eyes, and Signora Teresa Moretti's trembling hands. "The letter I spoke of," Poirot continued, "does not exist. It was a fiction, a trap to unsettle the guilty. And unsettle it did." A murmur of shock rippled through the group. Lorenzo's eyes flashed with anger. "A trick! You've wasted our time, Poirot." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "No, Signor Rinaldi. The trap, it has worked. For in your reactions, I saw the truth. Let me explain, step by step, how Hercule Poirot has solved this crime." He began to pace, his movements deliberate. Dottore Vitti was murdered but remained silent, her green eyes wide. Poirot continued, undeterred. The sapphire brooch was the Conte's treasure, but it held a secret, a hidden compartment discovered when I examined it closely. Within, I found a tiny note written in blue ink. E.V. Nose. This note, it was written by you, mademoiselle, and placed in the brooch, perhaps as insurance, perhaps as a warning. Contessa Isabella gasped, her composure fracturing. "Clara, is this true?" Poirot held up a hand. "Let me continue. The note suggests Dottore Vitti knew something dangerous about the Conte's death. Signora Moretti overheard him speak of a precise dose, and Lorenzo suspected his incompetence, or worse. But it was you, Mademoiselle Beaumont, who acted. You were in the garden, sketching roses, and you carried a petal into the study, perhaps caught in your sleeve. You sedated Vitti's wine, ensuring he was vulnerable, then stabbed him with the letter opener, a weapon of opportunity, to silence him forever." Clara's voice was a whisper. "You have no proof." Poirot's smile was cold. "The proof, it is in the details. The blue ink on the brooch matches your pen. The rose petal links you to the garden. And your lie about the locked door, Signora Moretti found it ajar, proving you were inside. You wrote traditore yourself to cast suspicion elsewhere, perhaps on Lorenzo, whose cigarette case you took from his room." Lorenzo's face reddened. "You stole it?" "To frame me," Clara's composure shattered, her voice rising. "I had to. Emilio was going to expose me. He knew I helped the Conte hasten his end. Giovanni was suffering, and he begged me to help him die. Emilio suspected, kept pressing me, threatening to tell the Contessa. I couldn't let him ruin everything." The room erupted in gasps. Contessa Isabella rose, her eyes blazing. "You killed my husband? And Emilio?" Clara's tears spilled over. "It was mercy for Giovanni. But Emilio, he was greedy, manipulative."
Poirot's eyes gleamed in the moonlight. "The details, Hastings. The ink, the petal, the lie. They spoke when she would not. And the brooch, it was her undoing. The little grey cells, they never fail." The villa settled into an uneasy quiet, its secrets laid bare by the relentless logic of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The night had deepened over Villa Serenita,
its once vibrant elegance now muted by the weight of the revealed truth. It was 9 p.m., and the grand salon, where Clara Beaumont's confession had shattered the fragile veneer of civility, stood empty save for Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings. The flickering fire cast long shadows across the gilded mirrors, mirroring the somber mood that had settled over the villa. Hastings, his notebook closed for the first time in hours, sat opposite Poirot, his mind still reeling from the dramatic unmasking of the murderer. Poirot, his posture as impeccable as ever, sipped a tisane, the delicate aroma of chamomile a stark contrast to the grim events of the evening. His green eyes, though bright with the satisfaction of a solved case, carried a trace of melancholy. "Hastings, mon ami," he said, his voice soft but resonant. "The puzzle is complete. The truth laid bare. Yet, as always, the resolution of a crime brings not only clarity, but sorrow." Hastings leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Poirot, you were brilliant, as always, but I can't help feeling unsettled. Clara's confession, helping the Comte die, then killing Vitti to cover it up, it's so cold, so calculated. And yet she seemed genuinely broken when she confessed." Poirot nodded, his moustache twitching slightly. "Précisément, Hastings. The human heart, it is a paradox. Mademoiselle Beaumont acted out of what she believed was mercy for the Comte. Yet that act led to a second, more desperate crime. It is the tragedy of choices, mon ami. One misstep, and the path to ruin is paved." Hastings glanced at the fire, its crackle filling the silence. "And the Contessa? How will she bear it?" To learn her husband's death,
They require time to align the pieces. But the brooch, it was the key. Its scratch, the blue ink caught within, it pointed to Mademoiselle Beaumont's pen, her lie about the locked door, her presence in the garden. And the word traditore, it was too perfect, too theatrical. Only one who wished to mislead would leave such a clue. Hastings shook his head, marveling. And the cigarette case, Lorenzo must be relieved to know he wasn't the target of her scheme. "Oui," Poirot said. "But Signor Rinaldi, he carries his own burdens. His resentment of Vitti, his suspicions about his brother's death, they clouded his judgment, made him an easy scapegoat. The killer, she is clever, but not clever enough to outwit Hercule Poirot." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Contessa Isabella entered, her face pale but composed, her black silk dress a somber contrast to the room's opulence. "Signor Poirot," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "I owe you my thanks. You have uncovered a truth I could not have faced alone. But tell me, how did you know to look at the brooch?" Poirot rose, bowing slightly. "Madame, the brooch was mentioned with such reverence, yet it was locked away, untouched. When I found this scratch and the ink, I suspected it held a secret. The note inside, E.V. knows, confirmed that Dottore Vitti was a threat to someone. Mademoiselle Beaumont's lies, her proximity to the study, they completed the picture." The Contessa's eyes glistened, but she held her composure. "Giovanni trusted her. I trusted her. And now, I must rebuild." Poirot's expression softened. "Madame, the truth, it is painful, but it is also a foundation. You will build anew, with clarity." She nodded, a single tear escaping, and left the room. Hastings watched her go, then turned to Poirot. "What now, Poirot? The case is solved, but the villa feels haunted." Poirot's gaze drifted to the fire. The ghosts of betrayal.
Lingering unease. The echoes of Clara Beaumont's confession still reverberating in his mind. Hercule Poirot, ever composed, stood by the window, his polished shoes catching the morning light as he adjusted his cufflinks with meticulous care. "Hastings, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice a quiet murmur. "You are troubled, oui?" The resolution of a crime. It brings clarity, but it also leaves scars. This is the way of things. Hastings paused, folding a shirt with more force than necessary. "It's just, Clara seems so genuine, Poirot. A young woman, caught up in a moment of compassion for the Conti, and it led to murder. It's tragic." Poirot turned, his green eyes thoughtful. "Tragic, yes, but also inevitable. The heart, it makes choices that the mind cannot always justify." Mademoiselle Beaumont chose to ease the Conti's suffering, but in doing so, she opened a door to betrayal and death. The little grey cells, they see the pattern, but they cannot undo the pain. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Lorenzo Rinaldi entered, his lean frame less tense than before, though his eyes still carried a shadow of resentment. "Signor Poirot," he said, his voice gruff, "I wanted to thank you. You cleared my name, even if it meant exposing everything." Poirot inclined his head. "Signor Rinaldi, the truth, it is a double-edged sword. It frees, but it also wounds. You suspected Dottore Vitti of wrongdoing in your brother's death, did you not?" Lorenzo's fingers twitched toward his gold ring, then stilled. "I did. I never trusted him. Always thought he was too close to the family, too eager to stay after Giovanni's death. But I had no proof, only feelings." "And feelings," Poirot said, "they are not evidence. But they guided you to watch him, oui? Your cigarette case. It was a clumsy attempt to implicate you, but it also told me the killer knew your habits." Lorenzo nodded, his expression grim. "Clara must have taken it from my room. I never thought she'd go so far." Poirot's mustache twitched. "The desperate betrayal. It is a wound I did not expect. How do I move forward?" Poirot's expression softened. "Madame, you are the heart of this villa. You will mourn, you will heal, and you will rebuild. The sapphire brooch, it remains a symbol of your family's strength. Keep it close, but let it remind you of resilience, not betrayal." The Contessa's lips curved into a faint smile. "You see much, Signor Poirot. I will try." As they finished breakfast, Capitano Rossi arrived, his weathered face grim but respectful. "Signor Poirot, the paperwork is complete. Signorina Beaumont has been taken to Florence for formal charges. The wineglass tested positive for a sedative, as you suspected, and the blue ink on the brooch matches her pen. Your deductions were remarkable." Poirot bowed slightly. "Merci, Capitano. But it is the facts, they speak. I merely listen." Rossi nodded, then departed, leaving Poirot and Hastings to prepare for their journey back to London. As they gathered their belongings, Hastings glanced at his watch. 9 a.m. The villa, though still grand, felt diminished, its secrets stripped away by Poirot's relentless logic. "Poirot," Hastings said as they walked to the waiting car, "do you ever tire of this? Uncovering lies, exposing pain?" Poirot paused, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. "It is a burden, Hastings, but also a calling. The truth, it is a light in the darkness, and Hercule Poirot, he cannot turn away from it." The car pulled away from Villa Serenità, its stone facade fading into the morning mist. As the Tuscan countryside rolled by, Hastings felt a quiet resolve settle over him. The mystery was solved, the guilty exposed,
But the echoes of Villa Serenita's tragedy would linger, a reminder of the delicate balance between justice and sorrow. Chapter 13. The Unseen Shadow. The train to Florence rattled through the Tuscan countryside, its rhythm a steady counterpoint to the somber mood within the compartment, shared by Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings. It was 11 a.m., and the events at Villa Serena too.
Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of quiet satisfaction. You begin to see, Hastings, the layers beneath the surface. The case, it is like an onion. Each layer reveals another, and sometimes tears are shed. You are correct. There is an unseen shadow, a question unanswered. Before Hastings could press further, the train slowed and a porter announced their arrival at Florence. As they disembarked, Poirot's demeanor shifted, his focus sharpening. "We have one final task, mon ami," he said. "A visit to the Polizia, where Mademoiselle Beaumont awaits. There is a detail I must confirm." By 12:30 p.m., they were seated in a stark office at the Florence police station, where Capitano Rossi greeted them with a mix of respect and curiosity. Clara Beaumont, pale and composed, was brought in, her hands cuffed that her chin held high. Her green eyes met Poirot's, a flicker of defiance still burning within. "Mademoiselle Beaumont," Poirot began, his voice calm but incisive, "you have confessed to the murder of Dottore Vitti and to aiding the Conte's death. But there is a piece missing. The conversation Signora Moretti overheard, Vitti speaking of a precise dose. It was not with you, was it? There was another, someone who knew of your act and used it to manipulate Vitti." Clara's lips parted, then closed, her gaze dropping to the table. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice low but steady. "You're right, Monsieur Poirot. There was someone else. Emilio wasn't alone in his suspicions. He was working with—" Lorenzo Hastings' eyes widened, his notebook flipping open. "Lorenzo Rinaldi! But he despised Vitti!" Clara's smile was bitter. "Exactly. Lorenzo suspected Emilio had a hand in Giovanni's death, but he had no proof. When I helped Giovanni die, at his request, to end his suffering, Emilio found out. He didn't confront me directly. Instead, he went to Lorenzo, offering to expose me for a price. Lorenzo refused to pay, but he pressured Emilio to act, to threaten me.
Expose a truth, but became entangled in a lie." Hastings scribbled furiously, the pieces falling into place. So Lorenzo's bitterness toward Vitti wasn't just personal, it was because he knew Vitti was complicit in a cover-up. "Précisément," Poirot said. "The unseen shadow. It was Lorenzo's silence. He knew of Vitti's knowledge but did not act, perhaps hoping Vitti would destroy himself. Instead, it led to murder." Clara was led back to her cell, her confession complete. As Poirot and Hastings left the station, the clock tower chimed 1 p.m., the sound echoing through Florence's ancient streets. Outside, the city bustled, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded. "Poirot," Hastings said, "will Lorenzo face charges for withholding this?" Poirot's expression was thoughtful. "I suspect not, Hastings. He committed no crime, only a sin of omission. The Contessa will decide his fate within the family. For us, the case is closed." As they boarded another train, this time bound for the coast and their journey back to London, Hastings felt the weight of the villa's secrets lift slightly, though the shadow of Lorenzo's complicity lingered. Poirot, gazing out at the passing landscape, seemed at peace, his little gray cells satisfied with the final piece of the puzzle. "The truth, Hastings," he said softly. "It is a mirror,
reflecting all, even that which we wish to forget. Let us leave Villa Serenita to its healing, and turn our minds to new horizons. The train carried them onward, leaving behind the echoes of betrayal and the quiet triumph of Poirot's relentless logic. Chapter 14. The Final Threads. This time, from Florence to the coast wound through the Italian countryside, its steady rhythm a soothing contrast to the turmoil left behind at Villa Serenita. It was 3 p.m., and the late summer sun painted the hills in hues of gold and green. Captain Hastings, seated across from Hercule Poirot in their private compartment, stared at his notebook, its pages filled with the intricate details of the case. The revelation of Lorenzo Rinaldi's complicity in pressuring Dottore Vitti had added a
End his suffering. A mercy, she called it. But mercy, it is a delicate thing, easily twisted by motive. The sapphire brooch, with its hidden note, E.V. knows, suggests Vitti suspected her act was not entirely altruistic. And Lorenzo, he knew Vitti held a secret, but chose to manipulate rather than confront. This, Hastings, is where the final threads lie. Hastings frowned, flipping through his notes. You think Clara had another motive for helping the Conte die? Money, perhaps? Or something to do with the manuscript she mentioned? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Precisement? The manuscript, letters from the Conte's grandfather. Clara said they held historical value. But what if they held a secret worth killing for? A secret the Conte wished to protect, even in death. The train's whistle sounded, marking their approach to a small coastal station. Poirot rose, his movements brisk. Come, Hastings. Before we leave Italy, there is one final inquiry to make. The Contessa, she holds the key to this manuscript. By 5 p.m., Poirot had arranged a brief return to Villa Serenita, convincing Capitano Rossi to allow them access to the library. The Contessa, though weary, agreed to meet them, her black dress a somber reminder of the villa's losses. They found her in the library, standing before a portrait of the late Conte, her expression a mix of resolve and sorrow. Signor Poirot, she said, her voice steady, you have already done so much. Why return? Poirot bowed slightly. Madame, there is a final thread to tie. The manuscript Mademoiselle Beaumont sought in the study. Letters from your husband's grandfather. May we see it? The Contessa's eyes narrowed, but she nodded, retrieving a small, leather-bound volume from a locked drawer. Giovanni valued this, she said, handing it to Poirot. He said it was a family legacy, but he never explained why. Poirot opened the book with care, his gloved fingers turning the brittle pages. The letters, written in faded ink, detailed manuscript. It is your legacy now. Use it as he intended. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I will. Thank you, Signor Poirot. As they left the library, Hastings noted the time, 6 p.m. The villa seemed quieter, its secrets finally laid bare. In the car back to the station, Hastings turned to Poirot. You knew the manuscript was the key, didn't you? That's why you pressed Clara about it. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. The little gray cells, Hastings, they see what the heart conceals. The manuscript was the motive behind the motive, a secret worth killing to protect or to expose. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting Villa Serenita into twilight, Poirot and Hastings boarded their final train, bound for the coast and their journey home. The case,
with all its layers of betrayal and redemption, was complete, leaving only the quiet satisfaction of truth unveiled. Chapter 15. The Quiet Exit. The coastal train to Calais hummed softly through the twilight, its windows framing a landscape of fading hills and deepening shadows. It was 7 p.m., and the journey from Villa Serenità to the port marked the final leg of Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings's Italian Odyssey. Inside their compartment, the air was calm, a stark contrast to the storm of revelations that had unfolded over the past days. Hastings, his notebook now tucked away, gazed at the passing scenery, his mind still tracing the intricate threads of the case. Poirot, seated opposite, polished his pocket watch with a silk handkerchief, his green eyes reflective in the dim light. "Hastings, mon ami," Poirot said, breaking the silence. "You are quiet, but your thoughts, they are loud. The case of Villa Serenità, it lingers, oui?" Hastings nodded, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "I can't help it, Poirot. The way it all unraveled, Clara's betrayal, Lorenzo's complicity, the manuscript's secret, it's like a novel, but one that leaves a bitter taste. I keep wondering if we could have seen it sooner." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of gentle amusement. Vitti was up to something but didn't act. Will he face consequences? Poirot's gaze drifted to the window, where the last rays of sunlight glinted on the sea. Signor Rinaldi, he is guilty of silence, not of murder. The law, it will not touch him, but his conscience, it may. The Contessa will decide his place in the family, and that, perhaps, is punishment enough. A porter passed, offering coffee, which Poirot declined with a polite wave. He turned to Hastings, his expression philosophical. "This case, Hastings, it reminds us of the fragility of trust. The Conte trusted Clara. Clara trusted her own heart. Vitti trusted his greed, and Lorenzo trusted his suspicions. Each trust, it led to betrayal, and yet, from betrayal, we found truth." Hastings nodded, struck by the weight of Poirot's words. "You always say the truth is a light in the darkness, Poirot, but sometimes it burns." "Précisément," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. "And yet, without it, we stumble blindly. Hercule Poirot, he does not stumble. He illuminates." The train pulled away from the station, carrying them closer to Calais and their eventual return to London. By 8 p.m., the compartment was bathed in the soft glow of a reading lamp, and Poirot opened a small volume of poetry, a rare indulgence. Hastings, sensing the case was truly closed, allowed himself to relax, the tension of Villa Serenità fading like the coastline behind them. "Poirot," he said after a moment, "do you ever think about the cases we leave behind, the people, the pain?" Poirot closed his book, his expression serene. "Always, mon ami. Each case, it is a chapter in the book of human nature. We solve the puzzle, we right the wrong, but the story, it continues without us. And so we move to the next chapter." As the train sped through the night, the stars emerged above, a silent witness to their journey. Villa Serenità, with its secrets and sorrows, was now a memory, its mysteries unraveled by the relentless logic of Hercule Poirot. Hastings closed his eyes, the gentle sway of the carriage lulling him toward